Welcome to IndoctriNation, a weekly conversation series about protecting yourself from systems of control. I'm your host, Rachel Bernstein.
Hello, everyone. Today on the show, we have Detective Mike Weber. He's a seasoned law enforcement professional with 40 years of experience, specializing in crimes against children. Throughout his career, he has investigated over 50 medical child abuse cases, resulting in 13 convictions with 3 trials currently pending. Detective Weber has written influential articles on medical child abuse for professional publications, including the FBI Law Enforcement Bulletin. Mike received the 2016 NCMEC Texas Hero for Children Award. His latest work, The Mother Next Door, co-authored with our previous guest, Andrea Dunlop, uncovers the complex maze of psychological, systemic, and cultural issues that compound Munchausen by proxy and offers solutions for how we might find our way out. If you haven't already, make sure to go back and listen to our previous interview with Mike's co-author, Andrea Dunlop. You can find out more about Mike and his work at www.mikeweberconsulting.com. It's a very powerful conversation that we had, and I'm so happy you're getting a chance to hear it. Here is Detective Weber now. It is my honor, actually, to have Detective Mike Weber with us today. It is a subject that is a difficult one to tackle. It's a difficult one to deal with on a personal level with the people who are victimized by it. And it is one of these things where, I'm sure people have asked you, how do you do it? How do you handle these cases? How do you compartmentalize and still do your work and still, find a way to just be very professional about it without being kind of in a puddle of emotion. And it is something I get asked a lot just by being a therapist and doing interventions. But there has to be a way that people can keep going with this work because it is so vital, so important. And there are too few people like you who are addressing this. So I am so glad that you're doing this in general, but also I'm very glad that you're here with us today to talk about this work and what it means and how it is different in some significant ways. So I would love for you to take a moment and introduce yourself, and then we'll start talking.
Sure. My name is Detective Mike Weber. I'm a crimes against children's detective at the Tarrant County Sheriff's Office, and that's in Fort Worth, Texas.
Okay. Crimes against children. So already now we're dealing with a subject that for some people they would not be able to take on. There is a certain kind of steely nervous system that you need to have in order to do this work. So tell me a little bit about what drew you to this.
No, that's kind of a funny story. I had been in narcotics. I worked 4 years as a undercover narcotics detective. And, we had to rotate out after 4 years. So I'd been back on patrol about a year and I was looking for something challenging, something different. Now, when I was in narcotics, my sergeant's desk was 5 feet away from mine. My lieutenant's desk was 10 feet away from mine. And when I started, a position came open in crimes against children at Arlington Police Department. And I started, I looked into it and I found out that it was, I talked to someone who had worked that position and she's like, so what's this child advocacy center thing? And she's like, well, that's, you don't work at the police department. You work at the child advocacy center. I'm like, wait, I'm not at the police department. She's like, no. I'm like, okay, so where's my sergeant and lieutenant? She's like, they're at the police department. I'm like, wait, you're telling me I can work alone, without the allure to me, sadly. Now, once I got there, I realized how important these cases were and that they're the hardest cases to work in police work because you rarely have any what normal people would consider evidence in these cases, physical evidence. And when I found out that I could work independently, I jumped at the chance. And like I said, I found out how challenging these cases were, how important they were. And that just kind of led me down a path. Nothing has been planned throughout this whole thing. I started working there. Then I eventually I retired from Arlington Police Department with 24 years, and I went to a local DA's office in their crimes against children's unit as an investigator. And then I was assigned my first case of medical child abuse, or Munchausen by proxy. And then from that point, I just went to my boss, and my attorney boss said, "You get any more of these? Why don't you give them to me?" She's like, "Well, Mike, we've hadn't had any of these in the 8 years I've been here." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's great." Because there's a lot of dang work. I worked the case terribly. I didn't know what I was doing. There was no template. There was no training. And so a month later, the Hope Ybarra case came in. From that case forward, that was in 2009. I worked 16 reports of this abuse. We filed 6 criminal cases up to 2015. And then we elected a DA who, frankly, didn't want these cases being worked. So I left that office in 2018. Interestingly enough, in 2016, Bill Wayburn was elected sheriff of Tarrant County. And Bill Wayburn, one of those first 6 cases that I worked, he ended up adopting the little girl in that case.
Oh, wow.
So he was extremely familiar with this abuse. I had 2 cases that, people were still calling me on them, even though the DA had stopped me from working them. People were still calling me on those cases. CPS investigators were. And I knew that there were 2 that were not being investigated by police that should be investigated. And so the sheriff brought me over, and we adopted all of these cases. I'm going to have countywide jurisdiction. So we took them over from local police departments, and I've been working them ever since. And since 2018, filed 10 or 11 additional cases of this abuse. And I have 4 or 5 open cases now. This happens way more commonly than people think. It's never investigated by police. And CPS in my state, they have no policies on this abuse. They have no training, mandated training for their people on this abuse. Like when cases come into CPS, they have a category to put them in, physical abuse, medical neglect. They have no category for this abuse, which is a very different form of abuse. It's been quite the interesting battle, I will put it that way, with people I shouldn't have to battle in these cases.
Incredible. I'm just hearing that the DA didn't want to, address this. It says so much about how people like you need to jump in as the rescue heroes. It shouldn't have to take that you are able to help people in spite of the powers that be, that happens a lot in my work too. And if anyone is wondering at all why there is someone like you coming onto this show to talk, it's because there's more overlap in our fields than I think people realize. And I think also that you not only have this coercion, indoctrination of the person themselves who might start to believe that they are sick, which we can certainly talk about, or that they're fragile in some inherent way when it was just that their fragility was created by the person making them sick, but that, you don't really know that it's abuse. You think someone is caring for their child. Same thing within religious organizations that are more cultic, within environments where there are manipulators, where people don't know that what's happening to them is abuse or neglect or endangerment. They think it's God's love, or they think it's a caring parent, or they think that it's someone helping to correct something that was wrong with them. I know in some cultic groups, they see that there is this sort of karmic trajectory that people are on where they are undoing something that they did that was bad in a past life by suffering through this life. So there isn't a question about if this should be happening to this child or not. It sort of all makes sense in terms of that equation that, they must have done something in a past life. And that's why they keep winding up in the hospital, or that, there's so many other misinformed and very confused diagnoses for this and ways to look at it. And then the person who is being abused in this way, the child, is someone who just gets caught in this vortex of misinformation and confusion. And then a perpetrator gets away with it over and over. And so we see this a lot. We also see sometimes the legal world not going after religious organizations, thinking that that would be akin to religious persecution and they have the right to do what they feel is right to do. And there are also some people I've worked with who have been involved in raids on their compounds only to have the people who are from government agencies leave without rescuing anyone because they were able to be talked into, seeing that everyone was safe when they just simply were not. And some were hoping to be picked up and carried outside the gates by someone in uniform, and it just never happened. So I love hearing when people are saying, even with you, Mike, where you kind of got into this by happenstance, enjoying the freedom of it, but then it spoke to your heart. And so you've stayed with it. So I'm sure there have been, just starting with how many frustrations there have been by people dropping the ball. I'm sure you've seen that a lot.
Yeah, especially in the cases of Munchausen by proxy. These cases are difficult, right? They're not a slam dunk in a courtroom for attorneys. They're not, because it's extremely misunderstood by the public. You hear the public all the time go back to, well, why would a doctor ever do anything if it wasn't needed? And they just don't understand how important medical history is to a doctor. And, at a trial, you pretty much have to educate your jury while you also show them the evidence. And a lot of people aren't willing to put in the time to do that. And then you also have, you're going to have to spend money. You're going to have to spend resources to get this done. And a lot of local DA's offices are not willing to do that. I preach when I teach on this. I tell, when you get to the punishment phase of trial, you need to have a psych expert come in and testify to the jury. You're basically having a psych expert say this isn't a psych issue, right? But there are only a certain amount of experts that can do that in the country, and that costs money. And I've been told, well, we're not going to pay for that. Okay, well, what is this child's childhood and possibly life worth to you? Is a question I have for those people who tell me these things. So, I am retiring soon, but it is a battle that I've had to fight with the next level of the justice system. That unfortunately we're not progressing. I've seen regression, which is unfortunate. It depends on who you elect. When I went to the DA's office, we had a very long-term DA who didn't really care about public opinion. Unfortunately, nowadays, public opinion kind of drives our DA's offices nationwide. That's yet another issue. And I just don't want to seem like I'm griping about the DA's offices. But in this particular form of abuse, they are not good. And again, a lot of that has to do with education. But you have to have a willingness to learn. If you don't have that willingness to learn, and if you're even hostile to learning on this topic because you don't want to deal with it, well, then you have some issues.
Right. I one time spoke to police officers out here in California about when they're called in to help in a situation where someone is controlling someone else in a relationship, and it's either emotional abuse, physical abuse, both. Because the way that it used to be when people would be called on the scene was they would interview the person who was abused in front of the abuser.
Yeah, we don't do that anymore. Yeah, or we shouldn't. I say we don't. That is not proper police work, right?
No. And they also will ask questions and ask the victim, well, why are you staying? If this is so horrible, and not understanding that is just redirecting all the focus on the victim. So there's so many things that remind people over time that they don't have protections. And then they don't have people who are savvy, who are going to get the nuance of that situation. And so I think it's really important to notice also along this trajectory, because you, I'm sure, have to deal with a lot of players in the scene, a lot of people. And I guess I'll preface a question that I'm about to ask by saying that sometimes when people come out of, let's say, cultic groups being diagnosed with a whole variety of things, usually by the person controlling them, who wants to see them as the source of the problem. Like they somehow had to put up with their victim, who has anger management issues or who is abusive. Usually narcissists will turn around the diagnosis onto the victim. You're the one abusing me. And so sometimes people believe that about themselves. They take that on and they think, wow, I must have really made this person so upset that they had to hit me or something. And then that is the story that they tell people when they're going for help or when they're arrested. I have found that sometimes when former cult members are sent to psychiatric hospitals, it's the psychiatric nurses who I have the most openness with, who are this lovely kind of rung on this ladder of care where they want to get it because they're having the most interaction. I'm wondering in the scene who you found to be the most open.
Nurses are hugely important in this because you're right. They have the most interaction with the patient. And I think because of that interaction, nurses are more suspicious, I think, than a lot of doctors are. I think that just is because nurses spend more time with the patient. They see the interactions with the patient and the parent in this abuse and are the abuser in this abuse. Normally in this abuse, it's the mother, like 95.6% of the time in the 2017 literary study is found to be the mom. So they see the interactions, they're talking to the patient. They may see things that the doctor doesn't see. And then the doctor, just depends on the doctor-nurse relationship. Are they going to listen to the nurse or are they going to listen to the mother? A lot of times doctors listen to the mother in these cases. And when that happens, mom can get what she wants. And I've had cases that involved a brain shunt placed that wasn't needed. I've had, you can get very, very serious medical interventions done just based on history.
Wow. And I know that we're mostly going to be talking about moms, but what is the percentage on that? Because I'm sure that, it also...
The study only said that it was 95.6% mom, 97.6% women. So you're looking at the rest, the 2.4% male, whether they're dad or a male figure. Dr. Mark Feldman will tell you that in every society that he knows of, the mother is a primary medical caregiver for the child. So is it something particular to women or is it something that is just a crime of opportunity? We don't have the research to know one way or the other.
Right. Okay. Oh, that's a really interesting point, though. I like that. I like that nuanced understanding of why it might be this way. Okay. And so I'm wondering for you, when we look at this, when we look at jumping into a case like this, what is something that you need to be able to try to clarify from the beginning? I mean, how do you start to, because it has to go along a certain path. And what helps you start on that path of wondering this?
All cases are different, but the main thing is to have it reported for someone to actually suspect it. And those reports, they can come from anywhere. Most of mine have come from the medical field. I think Cook's Children's Hospital has been pretty good at recognizing this or having, I don't want to say, not really suspicious, but when things start to appear this way, they are comfortable. Number one, they have a process to where they can analyze records and see if there are lies happening, and then they can report to police and CPS. And their doctors, I think, feel comfortable reporting because they know something will be done to the best that we can do something. You hate to say a process or a system, but we do. We kind of have a little process or a system set up for this. It's far from perfect. We're making it up as we go along because there is no template for this. But you have other places where this isn't done. And you have, the current environment in this country, there's a really harsh attack going on toward our child abuse pediatricians. The doctors who make some of the, they're not getting rich off their job. They're probably some of the lowest paid doctors. I mean, they still make a good wage, but they could go in other areas. and make more money. And yet they do this because they have a calling to do it. And there is a lot of bad media out that distorts what they are doing. But yeah, it's a struggle almost at every level. I have a supportive sheriff, which is a good thing. Cook's Children's is great. Like I've talked to CPS 4 times in my state. I've given them Arizona's policies on this abuse. Arizona is one of the few states where their Child Protective Services do have a policy on this. And, they haven't done anything yet. And they're a large government agency. I'm sure you've dealt with large government agencies. It'll take a child death that stays in the news cycle for multiple months. A child of someone that's important that gets reported that before they end up changing policy. There are challenges in this that I hope to overcome, but it's kind of been a slog, to tell you the truth.
Incredible. And you're saying that it's getting harder, and that's certainly disheartening. I'm hoping that because of you doing this work and getting kind of closer to codifying a system for it, that can be applied to next cases where they don't have to reinvent the wheel. And so hopefully that will help, while the powers that be might not be necessarily wanting to take this on. Other people might, because they now know what to do and then what to do next and what to do next. And that really helps people. I'm hoping that will be the case.
Right. Well, and, we have some things in the work. Andrea and I are publishing a book. We go through all the problems that led to me not working these cases at the DA's office in that book, and kind of why I left there. And I also do trainings nationwide for CPS and police or medical, and try to get out there in the training. This is how we do this. From the time this hits your desk until your criminal case is over, these are the steps you need to take. Now, will people take those steps? Right? Because it's a lot of work. And I hear people say all the time, well, those cases are really hard. When I hear people say that, what I hear them saying is, well, I don't want to do the work.
Yeah, unfortunately. Right.
Well, we can certainly talk about these offenders and how they kind of compare to the cult aspect.
Yeah, I most definitely want to talk about that. First, I want to go back to something you mentioned about the media and how that affects this whole landscape and people's perceptions. So if you can describe a little bit more about what you were referring to, and then we'll go on to talk about the offenders.
For listeners out there, go ahead and Google any case, any media report on Munchausen by proxy. You're going to find that 9 out of 10 of those reports never mention abuse. They will talk about mom's mental health, right? It's very important to point out, first and foremost, this is a crime. These offenders know what they're doing. They know what they're doing is wrong when they are doing it. And they demonstrate it through a pattern of deceit throughout these cases. That is the legal definition of sanity, right? There's a lot of things that are in the DSM that don't alleviate you of a criminal charge, right? Depression. I'm sorry, depression's in the DSM, but guess what? Depression is not an excuse to commit a crime. Pedophilia has been in the DSM since 1952. And this abuse has only been in there since 2013. There are many things in the DSM that doesn't mean that you are not legally sane and that you commit the crime. But we see the media portray this all the time as mom's mental health instead of a criminal act against the child. That's the first part of it. The second part of it is, if police and CPS, even if we do our jobs, if the prosecutor's office and the CPS attorneys and the family court judges and the criminal court judges do not do their job, for instance, if family court gives a child back, criminal court's probably going to dismiss the case. And now mom's going to run to the media, and mom's going to tell the media how she was falsely accused. And that happens quite often in these cases. If there's even a police investigation, right? Because most of these, there aren't a police investigation because police don't know what this is either. So then they can play the victim. And what makes for a better news story? A mom who actually abused her kids, or a poor mom that the system has set up on her and falsely accused her and tried to steal her child? What's the better news story? We can talk about several Maya Kolowski case. Your audience may be familiar with Take Care of Maya. That was on Netflix.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I highly encourage them to listen to season 3 of Andrea's podcast, Nobody Should Believe Me, to get the details that they intentionally hid from you, because it didn't make it a good story if they gave you those details.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. Yes. Everyone check that out. I think what also adds to the complexity of this, not that you needed anything to be added to the complexity of this, but here I go, that there are so many, and I talked to Andrea about this too, there's so many people, specifically women and girls, who are not believed when they say that something is wrong with them physically, or they say there's something wrong with their child. It often is an uphill battle just to not be discounted as hysterical and dramatic, or just being a worrywart and just go home and you'll be fine. And there are some recent cases of some deaths of some young women. They were even teenagers when they first went in, saying that they were having different symptoms. Turned out each of them, it was in different states, but it happened around the same time, so it made the news together. They both died of different forms of cancer because they were just told that they were just having a hard day, or it's because they broke up with their boyfriend, and that's what they were kind of somaticizing and malingering, sort of making up, that they were feeling a certain way, maybe for attention. And that there are people also who will, it's interesting. I had something happen to me, I'm now remembering, as a mom, where one of my kids is a redhead, and it has a high tolerance for pain, and was going in for some dental work. I won't get into it because for some people who have fears of this, I won't talk about the details. She wasn't given enough Novocaine, and she started yelling, and that's not like her, because she was, an athlete or whatever. She could handle a lot more than I ever could. And the dentist, who we never went back to after this, said, "Oh, come on, you're just doing that because your mom is here. You want to get like special ice cream after," and and
I don't blame you for not going back.
Right. And oh, come on, I have this with all my little girls who want to just be taken care of by them. You need her to hold your hand. I thought, oh my God. And he was a specialist dealing with a certain kind of surgery. That's why we went to him. Otherwise, I never would have. Someone in the waiting room, I see her finger like beckoning me, and I go outside, and she said, "Is your kid a redhead?" And I said, "How did you know that?" She said, "Because they require a different amount of painkillers. And most doctors just don't know that, and they don't want to be questioned about what they know and what they don't. And you need to let him know he needs to give her more, because their body synthesizes it in a different way." But it was already that it was because, and then he blamed me, "Well, you're hovering, and that's just making her emotional." I'm like, "I'm hovering because I don't trust you. We've never had this issue before, and now with you, but you're just going to put it all on me and put it on my child." So these things happen too. And so I'm sure that gets added into the confusion of the scene, right?
It's funny because as much as doctors will dismiss the concern of the person, or let's say it's a female going in for something and the doctors, don't believe her, they're exactly the opposite when it's a mother presenting the child as ill, which is interesting. It's very interesting to me. That has been my experience, right? That they will overbelieve a mother who's saying what's wrong with her child. They will overbelieve sometimes. In the case, obviously, in the cases that I see, right? We're not talking about standardized medical care. I want to be very clear here. We're talking about a small percentage of parents who abuse their kids in this way. And these offenders are also very, very manipulative. They're very charming. They're very sweet a lot of times. Most of them, doesn't have to be, not all of them, but the really good ones are that way. And so this abuse can continue on for quite a long time. And they just appear to be, the perfect mother taking care of their child. Yeah, it's funny how it's just, to me, because I've noticed kind of the same thing. I'm not female, right? I don't have those issues, but I've had plenty of females tell me that happens when they go to the doctor. And it's just, I've seen it just the exact opposite when it comes to their kids. And I think a lot of that is doctors are, they believe medical history. They're trained to believe the history provided by the mother, especially when you have a sweet, normal looking mother, who is talking to you.
Right. Right. Who seems very caring. Right. And protective and worried. So interesting.
Funny thing is, what we sometimes find out in these cases is things are very, very different behind closed doors.
Oh, interesting.
Gee, who would have thought, right?
Right.
Sexual abusers, you can't tell them right off the bat, right? That child abuse doesn't happen in public. Same with this.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Let's get more into this whole idea of the offender and how it is so akin to this kind of manipulation.
So they will use anyone for protection. So a lot of them homeschool their kids. I have nothing against homeschooling. I understand why parents do it in this day and age if you're actually homeschooling your kids, right? But for these offenders, it affords them the opportunity to isolate the child and for no one to have a medical history, right? Because teachers are with the kids 8 hours a day. They have medical histories for these kids for 8 hours. And in these cases, when they are in school, I go talk to the teachers and, they're seeing something very, very different than mom is telling the doctors, right? They're seeing either completely or much more healthy child the mom is presenting to the doctors. And so they will use the homeschooling groups as cover, right? So whenever they get accused, then it's, they're only accusing me because I'm a homeschooler. And they will rally these people to their cause. And they will manipulate these people into supporting them. It can be homeschool groups. I've seen a whole church group show up at trial for a lady who bought her son's casket and planned her son's funeral. And once separated from her, was perfectly fine. So, they can manipulate many, many, many different types of groups. The fragile children's groups, there are definitely kids who are fragile and they definitely need representation, right? But that is a great group for these offenders to hide in because they're going to the people who actually have medically fragile children are going to immediately assume when this person gets accused, well, I know her, she would never do that. And they're going to jump to her defense. Right? Because they think they have a lot in common. So you see them, and it can be pretty much any group of people that they can rally to their defense. Sometimes it's politicians.
Oh, okay. So you've seen that as well, that people will get politicians involved in their case?
Oh, absolutely. There's a case in Pennsylvania where a politician accused a hospital of overdiagnosing this just because they had more of a number of these cases than anyone else. Well, we have more of a number than them. So, and you didn't call me Mr. Politician. And kids don't vote. Their parents do. And if you think about it, if these cases aren't investigated, again, you're talking about people who are extremely attention seeking, these offenders. And if they're not investigated properly and they're not held to account for their actions, then they can, let's say CPS investigators do the right thing. They remove initially, and then the judge gives the child back. Now mom can run down to the legislature. She can talk to all of these politicians. She can tell them how she was falsely accused. Shockingly, politicians a lot of them think family courts decide guilt and innocence. That's not what family court does. And so they can, again, another attention fix for them, getting the attention from politicians. A lot of times they'll go to the news media after this happens. So you can see the problems if there's not a thorough investigation into this. And this isn't some diagnosis, right? It is a medical diagnosis, it is a psych diagnosis, but it is a evidence-based diagnosis. You can't do talk therapy with these offenders. That'd be like doing talk therapy with a pedophile and expecting the pedophile to tell you he's a pedophile. It's not going to happen. So it is evidence-based. You have to go through all of the evidence. You have to look at medical records. You have to do other things that I can get that only I can do as a police officer, right? That medical people can't do. I can talk to her friends. I can talk to the teachers. I can talk to I can get her computers. I can, sometimes, I can get a lot of additional evidence in these cases and then I can go back to the medical professionals, provide them with that evidence, and it firms up their diagnosis and this abuse. The most important thing is that we have separation of the victim from the offender. And that is far from a guarantee. And especially in my state and the current environment, family court judges are very hesitant to remove for any form of abuse in Texas currently. And we have to have that separation test, right? We have to know what's actually wrong with the child and what's not wrong with the child. And a lot of times they'll give visitation. And, especially if it's an older child, if they're 12, 13, 14, they're going to be emotionally disturbed when they're removed from their parents. And seeing the parents can often, they may just revert to saying, well, I can't do this or I can't do that once they see their parents, because that's what they know. That's the role they've been in their entire life sometimes. Kids only know what they're told by their parents. If kids are told they are sick from the time they're 1 year old, they're going to believe they're sick. They don't have a baseline for health.
Oh my goodness, I have so many questions. So the first thing is, have you dealt with a case where the child thought that there was something wrong, like that they really were wondering what was happening here, that they might not revert right back to thinking that they need help from that parent, but really wondering if they need help from that parent?
Yes, I have. Unfortunately, it's a current ongoing case that I can't really talk about.
Right. Okay. But it does happen sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, if you're 14 and you love your parent and your parent has taken care of you and you have all sorts of medical stuff going on, and suddenly your parent's out of your life and you have CPS sitting in a room with you, telling you you're okay, telling you you can eat, telling you you can do this, you can do that, you're going to have questions. And these cases become harder the older the child gets, because again, they also have learned the only way that they get love from their parent is to play that sick role. So they start to participate in the abuse. Still abuse, but it kind of clouds the picture, and you really have to work to differentiate whether mom or the child is. And that's how comes complete separation from the offender is so important. And we just don't get it very often.
Right. So that leads me into this next question that popped into my head while you were talking, which is, you have complete separation. The child is removed from the parent. Then the child potentially becomes asymptomatic. Then what? Then if they go back to the parent, then I'm assuming the parent feels worried about doing the same behaviors because suddenly the child would be symptomatic again. But wouldn't that be suspicious?
These offenders have a compulsion to commit this abuse. They may slow down while they're being looked at because they know what they're doing. They know it's wrong, but they do not ever stop. We just had a case in August where she was convicted and given 60 years. That's Jessica Jones, and she was poisoning all of her children with Benadryl. One of her youngest twins got the worst of it, and she had her in the hospital and was poisoning her with so much Benadryl that the 4-year-old was shaking. She was trying to present symptoms of a seizure disorder and get a diagnosis of epilepsy in the child. She'd also told her 11-year-old her entire life that she had epilepsy. Thankfully, we had a very protective father on that case. But even after she pled guilty, because the criminal justice system, she was a 33-year-old female. Even after she pled guilty, she was allowed to stay out on bond while they did a pre-sentence investigation. And by the way, she admitted giving this child, to me, she admitted giving her 4 or 5 adult strength Benadryl at a time to make her shake in a 4-year-old. And again, that's a minimization of how many she actually gave her, I believe. But after she had pled guilty in this case, she got a new boyfriend, poisoned his kids with medication. She had bond conditions of no contact. So I arrested her for that. Was she held in jail because she violated bond conditions and poisoned more kids? No. Did the DA's office ask for a bond condition hearing? No. She bonded out. Now, violating that bond condition is an actual criminal charge in Texas. So she bonded out on that charge. It was a misdemeanor. She goes online, changes her last name, gets a new boyfriend, poisons his 12-year-old with medication. And I arrest her again. And anytime I have to put in an arrest warrant, if she is allowed to bond out of jail, she will be a continued threat to the children of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I should never have to put that in an arrest warrant. But I did, because no one was doing anything to keep her in jail. They did that after she poisoned 2 other kids at least. So that just shows the compulsion and how they will continue this behavior, even if the child comes back to them perfectly fine. In that case, thank God we had a father who absorbed the shock of finding out that his wife was poisoning his children. She actually made admissions, which helped him understand that. But he did the right thing. That's not always what the dads in these cases do. A lot of times they line up right behind mom.
Right. And I suppose also that is potentially why the offending parent might stay with someone, knowing that they're not going to come forward, or knowing that they can convince them of things. And so I'm sure it is a surprise to suddenly find that your spouse is coming forward. But I wonder, when we talk about people doing these things in repetition, it makes a great amount of sense, because getting punished might seem irrelevant for them, because it's not getting to what the need is here. And that it is like having an addiction, right? So you might get stopped, but you still have the addiction. So you're going to find another dealer or someone who's going to be able to score you something else.
And a lot of these offenders, even if they can't find another child to do it to, then they'll start doing it to themselves. They'll start presenting themselves as ill when they're not.
So they can get what they were getting from doing it to someone else through doing it for themselves. And so what is it that they're trying to get? What have you noticed? What is the goal here?
Well, if you look at the definition of factitious disorder imposed on another in the DSM, for it to be factitious disorder imposed on another, it has to, or factitious disorder, it has to be for an intrinsic gain, right? So doing it to yourself or doing it to your a child has to be for intrinsic gain, right? Something inside, whether that's attention, whether that's love from a family member, whatever that may be, right? Anything else is, like you said, malingering. If you're doing it for money or services, that's just malingering. So it's some type of intrinsic need that they have in them that compels them to do this. Still, it is a choice. I want to make that very clear. We all have choices in life, and they are making the choice to continue to do this.
Right. And so that's interesting also, because that leads me into this next piece, which was also with the same caveat that you just gave of, even if we look at these people as having had difficulties growing up or having some kind of a disorder, that is still not an excuse. It's like people who have been abused in the past and then abuse others. That might be a reason, but it's not an excuse. And so what do we know about the histories of some of these people who you've come across?
And the problem with knowing anything about the histories of these people is you have to believe what they're telling you.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
I tell every investigator in this abuse that I talk to, CPS or police, I tell them, if these offenders tell you that the sky is blue, you need to go outside and look up, right? I've had numerous of them tell me they were, or have not told me, but have told medical professionals and other people that they're nurses, and they've never attended a nursing class in their life. Hope Ybarra presented herself as a PhD. She had a bachelor's degree. The lying sometimes, especially with the really advanced offenders, is goes far outside just the health of their child. And I think with those offenders, I think part of it is they get some type of intrinsic thrill out of fooling people, especially people they perceive as smarter or at a higher station in life than themselves. That's personal opinion. I'm going to be very clear. And that's just with the advanced offenders.
I think also with you being able to talk to others, or maybe even get records and histories, I wonder if just from talking to other family members or people of a previous generation, watching that kid grow up potentially, I'm just wondering if there's something that occurs that creates this, or if it really is from a lot of different sources and the way it manifests is this way in people.
There's some literature that suggests that this, they may have had child trauma in their lives, but in your conversation with Andrea, her and her sister grew up just the same way. Hope you borrow when I talked to her family. I mean, she came from a good family. None of her siblings are the way that she is. So why they feel this compulsion or need, what causes it, I don't know.
Okay. And so there are other questions that I want to ask you about. If people are suspicious of this, or even the child themselves, like who is there to go to, who to contact? But I don't want to jump into that before asking you if there was more that you wanted to talk about, just about the nature of this crime and the nature of the kind of person, or the relationships that you have seen, between the parent and the child here, because you've been exposed to a lot of that.
Yeah, and it's so dependent on the parent and the child. My sheriff's adopted daughter, 2 days after she was 3 when she was removed from mom, and 2 days after removal from mom, she's like, I don't need a mom. I don't need mommy anymore. I mean, yeah, I say all the time she was looking to upgrade at the mom position pretty dang quickly. I mean, she knew at 3, and she's a really, even today, because obviously she's my sheriff's daughter, I still have contact with her. She's a very headstrong. I don't know where she got it from, but I think because mom was presenting her as not being able to gain weight, and mom was, I believe, starving her at home. And I think there were a lot of nights at 3 years old where she got out of bed after mom went to sleep and went and rummaged around the garbage can to find something to eat. And I told her mom, if she wanted to be, she's 4'11". She's tiny, but I told her mom if she ever decided she wanted to be a Navy SEAL, she can. I mean, she has the mentality to go through that training, and so I mean that's one kid. But normally, you do have separation anxiety, especially if mom is real dramatic about the separation from the child. Parents or children feed off the emotion of their parents a lot of times. The main concern is the safety of the child, the physical safety of the child in these cases. So you need that removal, you need that separation time, but you also need to worry about the child's mental health going through it, and how to deal with that. We try to keep sitters in the room with them to keep them constantly engaged, and I encourage, I don't always get it, but I encourage the CPS investigator that is handling the case, that has developed a relationship to the child, to sit with the child in the hospital as much as they can. But, I do not control what the CPS does.
Right. Right. So, going back to sort of the cult scene, I've talked to a number of people who were raised in some of these polygamist cults, and they felt like they didn't have intrinsic value, but the fact that they were the 14th child when the other family only had 13, like it was sort of a numbers game. They were considered to be special because then they beat out this other family and made their parents look better. And that a lot of people raised in fundamentalist kinds of groups will say that the more perfect they could behave and the more still they could sit during a 4, 6, 8-hour service or something, sermon by this, usually a pontificating blowhard of a pastor who didn't care about kids being able to eat or go to the bathroom. Pardon me, but that's, how they will often describe it. Like, oh, I got so tired of him enjoying the sound of his own voice. But that the more they could make their parents look a certain way, the more value they had. And I wonder about this here, if kids really wonder, right, if they have any intrinsic value, or if it's just that they gave their parent the feeling of something that they were needing.
Well, and I think, especially as they get older, they just learn to play the sick one. It's kind of the same thing that you're talking about. As they get older, they learn to sit there for 8 hours. And with this abuse, as they get older, they learn to participate. They learn what to say to doctors. They learn, sometimes just to keep their mouth shut and not tell the doctor anything and let mom talk for them. And yeah, it's extremely similar to that in this abuse, as especially as they get older.
Right. Incredible. And I'm wondering also, as you've seen, now that you've been working on these cases for some time, that you have seen these children become adults. And I wonder what life has been like for them. I'm sure, again, I know we're talking about human beings, so there are different trajectories for each person, and it's going to be based on a lot of different factors. But what have you seen?
Oh, well, they have a different life, right? I mean, that's something that's really kept me going through this is seeing, I still have relationships with several of the kids. George Honeycutt's kids are now, they're 16, 17 years old. The sheriff's daughter is 16. And you see these kids get to a full potential that they may not have even lived. There's a 6 to 9% mortality rate of this abuse, right? It's second most deadliest child abuse to abusive head trauma. And these kids may not have even lived if no one did anything for them. And, George Honeycutt may have, well, that's not true about George. George did the right thing. George fought hard. I was going to say he may not have even known that this was happening. But for other families that I've had, I mean, dad, like Derek Jones, he could have gone, the Benadryl poisoning dad, he could have gone years down the line without knowing. I mean, it was a very traditional family. Jessica Jones didn't work. Derek worked, a lot. She took care of the kids and their medical needs. And he just went along with what she said. Of course, you're going to trust your spouse with the health of your children. So, I mean, it could have been very different lives for these kids. Derek's, he's only 2 years out, right? His child's 6, but the changes in his child were pretty immediate about that. And I hate to keep pushing Andrea's podcast, but she's right now in the middle of releasing 4 episodes on that case, and we're on episode 2. And we highlight the deficiencies in the legal system, and because a lot of things that happened in that case should never happened and should never happen again. That's the one I told you about where she poisoned additional children. There were other things. I'll let Derek talk about the other things that he experienced. So having the connections with the kids, that's what has kept me doing this. At some point I have to hang it up, and I'm going to when the book publishes. Probably going to have to because of some of the things I say in the book. But people need to hear what's in the book. They need to read what's in the book, and hopefully they'll decide to take this a little bit more seriously if they do.
Wow. So I want to be able also to talk about the language to use here, because sometimes people, if they're suspicious of it, they're noticing it in maybe a family member or like in Andrea's situation, or if a child is starting to wonder if, their parent is sort of keeping this going. Who do you contact? Because sometimes people won't do anything because they don't know what there is to do. And they also are not sure how to put it into words in a way that is going to help it be believed and also be recognized. And so what are some guidelines that you can give people if they're suspicious about this?
I always encourage people, if you suspect, you report, especially in this abuse. If you are to the point where mentally you've crossed the bridge where you think, well, maybe this mother's making this child sick, you need to listen to yourself, and you need to report your suspicion. Just because it's a suspicion doesn't mean it's true, but people should investigate that. So you can make that call to CPS. Some of the key words to use, obviously, Munchausen by proxy. Tell them that you think mom is, whatever you think, she's intentionally making the child sick. She's causing symptoms in the child. She's poisoning the child. However, whatever's happening is how you just pick your phrasing to make them understand very clearly that you're talking about abuse. That this is not a neglect case. This is not a neglectful supervision. This is physical child abuse. Is the way that I would I would tell them that. Realize there's only 2 states that I know of in the U.S., Arizona and Arkansas, that have policies on this abuse for CPS. So they may be lost. Yeah. And no one receives mandated training that I'm aware of on this abuse, CPS or law enforcement. So, yeah, we have a whole subset of child physical abuse that we're pretty much ignoring. And the interesting thing about that is this abuse, I think we're seeing a lot more of it because it's easier to commit with the internet, and then the attention fix of social media is at your fingertips, right? You have both the means and the satisfaction mechanism in your hand at all times. If it was 1992 and you wanted to commit this abuse, you would have to go to a library, and you had no medical knowledge. You'd have to go to a library. You'd have to research it. This day and age, it's a 5-minute Google search to find symptoms to present to a doctor. It's not hard. I say it all the time. It's the easiest way to commit and get away with child abuse, at least in my state.
It's interesting also to hear about children who learn how to participate in the scene, and they learn how to keep the relationship going and how to keep that parent happy and taken care of. It's reminding me, I mean, this isn't an abuse per se, but it's reminding me what can happen even to a lesser degree. I think of someone I know who went on Facebook about 10 years ago and talking about how depressed she always was. And then she had children. And I thought, oh, that might help her because she'd wanted children for quite some time. That might help her. Now she just posts how depressed her children are. And I think they're little, but I wonder if they feel like they need to be. Like at the end of the day, in fact, I was one time talking to her, and she was picking up her kid in the carpool line. And she actually asked her kid, what was hard about today? And I thought, wow, that's leading the witness.
Right.
And so, right. So there is some benefit that she gets, and the kids are learning at a young age. There's some, like, I would see her sort of smile if they said that they had a hard day. So there is something there, of course. And so I think people are going to have this to varying degrees of need and push it to varying degrees of safety or lack thereof. But just as we're kind of finishing up, I want to make sure that you get to hit the points that you wanted to make. And what else did you want to make sure to teach us about today?
The book that me and Andrea are writing together is called The Mother Next Door, Medicine, Deception, and Munchausen by Proxy. And we cover 3 cases of this abuse. One of them is the sheriff's case, which I've talked about on here. One of them is the Hope Ybarra case. And then the third one is one that I've never spoken publicly on. And I'm going to wait for the book to come on that one, but that kind of explains. And that one goes really into the politics of the office and how those politics changed and how that office changed their stance on this abuse and didn't approach it nearly as aggressively as the previous administration had.
Interesting. Wow. Okay.
And people can find me at MikeWeberConsulting.com. It's mainly what I'm doing currently is training consulting. So if you want me to come train, I train any discipline that touches this abuse: medical, CPS, law enforcement, CPS attorneys. You know, the interesting thing is family court judges need training on this so terribly. The last article in the Juvenile and Family Court Journal published on this abuse was in 1990. And a lot has changed since then. So yeah, I train for all of those disciplines, and I can give you a roadmap on this abuse and what you need to do from the time, like I said, the time it lands on the desk to the time you're in criminal trial.
That's invaluable. And so you are able to fly around to do these kinds of trainings in the US or maybe even internationally.
Yeah, I was in Alaska for their Child Advocacy Center conference in September, and I was at the Chicago Children's Hospital, I think in October, and did a training for their child abuse team, which includes, you know, their detectives, their prosecutors. So yeah, and I've done multiple trainings over the years, and I hope if you schedule me for a training, don't just take it as, oh wow, this is kind of a weird deal. This is, if you have a children's hospital in your jurisdiction, this is happening. I'm averaging 2 prosecutable cases a year on this abuse. And that's one person doing it. if we have more, if we have more resources, maybe we could do more. And you're not going to get there criminally on every case because there are no laws on this abuse. We are going back to the Texas state legislature this session. We've gone to them 3 previous sessions to try to get a law passed on this abuse that would make it illegal for a caregiver to intentionally, keyword, provide a false medical history to a medical provider to get an unneeded medical intervention that resulted in a mental impairment or a bodily injury or serious bodily injury. Seems it would be common sense, but we get a lot of opposition from people who frankly, just want to be able to do with their kids what they want to do with their kids.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh my goodness. Well, I think you are incredible that you have been devoted to this subject and to the people who are affected by it, to the vulnerable ones in the scene, right?
Incredible or stupid, one of the two, right? Stubborn is the problem. Stubborn
right?
that could be a good and a bad trait.
Fair question. I think a lot of us, right, can ask ourselves the same question, like, really, we signed up for something this hard? But it's I'm sure that it's been in moments has been really very validating that there was a reason that you stuck with it. So thank you. And thank you so much. And I really, really want people to take advantage of you, so to speak, but what you have put together and the fact that you have formalized this in a way that's user-friendly. Like, this is sort of an overlay you can put over the scene and just follow the steps. It's an incredible thing. So I hope people contact you. It was incredible to speak with you, and I hope to be able to do it again sometime soon.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. One more thing before you go. Thank you so much to Detective Weber for doing this work, for doing work that not a lot of people have done, nor continuously do. And there is a great need for people in law enforcement, people who are detectives, people in the legal world to really learn about this and to know how to address this. It happens so often that people are swayed by parents. People are swayed by a parent who can come out as their child's protector. People are swayed by parents who seem so charming and so kind and so self-sacrificial that they've given up all their time and all their resources to just help their child, that people don't want to imagine that that person is the one doing them harm. They just don't want to see that there are parents who would do this to their children. Parents who knowingly would harm their child, knowingly would make their child sicker and sicker and cause them to have great pain and go through medical tests. It's really very emotional. When you hear someone like Detective Weber talk about how this disorder is one where the person knows they are harming and hurting their loved one, but they just simply can't stop because they need to get what we call in the field secondary gains. They need to get attention. They need to get this community around them caring so much about them and how much they have been a champion for their child. And they're so driven to get that need met that they don't mind making their loved one cry, making their loved one die. It is chilling. It is absolutely chilling. And it is also really important for us to look at what happens to these children, to be able to acknowledge that once you are someone who has been directly affected by this, by having a parent who has put you in harm's way, a parent who has landed you, let's say, in the hospital, that you then are not necessarily inherently a sickly person. You are not inherently a weak person. You then don't need and never needed that adult to protect you, to help you, to come in and bring you to the doctor or to the hospital when it seemed like your symptoms were just getting bigger and bigger. In fact, what you needed was this person to move out of your way so that you could be the healthy child you were supposed to be. It also happens that there are some children who might not be very healthy, and a parent will then make those symptoms worse or last for longer because they realize they're getting their needs met at the expense of their child. And so much of this is truly hard to look at. But the indoctrination is there. People are really persuaded by very charming and long-suffering parents, very kind and seemingly, again, self-sacrificial kinds of parents. But I think also, when you look at these children, they're really baffled about what's true about themselves. They don't know if they really need that parent's help. They don't know if they ever needed that parent's help. And it's a very difficult thing to ask someone to look at their entire childhood, to wonder if their parent actually ever cared about them. It's something that a lot of people will put off looking at for obvious reasons. And there are also children who will grow up in these scenarios and really think that there's something wrong with them and think that they can't take a chance medically and that they can't put themselves in any kind of risky situation because they'll wind up back in the hospital. It's not until that adult moves out of that child's life or that child becomes an adult themselves and can live on their own that they see how much better they do without them. We want to know that the people in our lives, especially our parents, are wanting to do what's best for us, not wanting to use us to do what they think is best for them. And it's also interesting to see how much you have to push through when you're dealing with these cases, how much you have to convince others that this is what's going on. Because I think a lot of us want to be able to have blinders on. A lot of us have a hard time really seeing this. I think that's why there have been so many delays in people dealing with abuse cases in the Catholic Church and other kinds of groups where we don't want to see what has happened. We don't want to know it. We don't want to have to acknowledge it. We don't want to know that it's the truth in some situations. But we do need to be able to still honor the people that this has happened to. And so that does mean looking, and that does mean really seeing. And for people who have been in situations like this with parents who have relegated them to be sickly, to feel weak, to be put through so much trauma unnecessarily, it is very important that you connect with other people who have been in similar situations. Don't feel that you are alone. It happens rarely, which is a good thing, but still rarely when we think statistically the number of people on our planet. That still means that you will have thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people to connect with. These disorders happen to a number of people, and then they happen to a number of their children. So don't ever feel like it's only you that has experienced this. That's one of the reasons that we're doing shows about things like this, so people don't feel alone. But people can also then understand this in all of its nuances, that it is a crime, and it's a crime that uses children. It's a crime that keeps them from being able to feel like they are healthy, but it also, in many situations, keeps them from having a childhood of their own. Thank you again for all the work that you've done, Detective Weber, and I'll talk to you all next week.
Thank you very much for listening. Please support IndoctriNation on Patreon at patreon.com/indoctrination. Be sure to give us a follow on our social media. Find us on Facebook and Instagram using @Indoctrination Podcast. And for Twitter, find us at _indoctrination. we love hearing from you too. So send us an email at indoctrinationshow@gmail.com. And for more updates on the show, visit our website at www.podpage.com/indoctrination.